Welcome to News Round, a recap of stories in the week. I'm Teniola Shoboale. The headlines. Attorney General of the Federation receives audited report of Niger Delta Development Commission indicating that oil commissions operating in Nigeria are owing the country $4 billion. President Muhammadu Buhari relieves ministers of agriculture and power of their appointments, insists they were not sacked because of weak performance. Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Boss Mustafa, appeals to State Commissioners of Health to address issues that lead to strike actions. Plus, Taliban says Afghanistan is a free nation as it hails U.S. exit after 20 years. News Round begins with the audited report of the Niger Delta Development Commission, which indicates that oil companies operating in Nigeria are owing the country $4 billion. The report also shows that several projects initiated by the NDDC are yet to be completed. Minister of the Niger Delta, Godswill Akpabio, submitted the audited report to the Attorney General of the Federation, Abubakar Malami.
Stacked in these bags is the final report of the forensic audit of the Niger Delta Development Commission, NDDC. President Muhammadu Buhari had in October 2019 approved the audit of the operations of the commission from 2001 to 2019 following allegations of corruption in the agency. After 16 months, the report is being presented to the federal government for action.
Thank you very much. The provision of Public Procurement Act should be strictly adhered to, and all violations to the Act and the award of contracts, such as contract splitting and other due process violations, must be avoided, and if found, should be punished.
According to the report, the Commission operated over 300 accounts in commercial banks. It further states that efforts should be made to recover $4 billion outstanding contributions from oil companies. The report adds that the Commission received over 6 trillion naira in 19 years, and over 13,000 projects have been abandoned.
While the research was going on, many of the past contractors went back to site, and they were able to complete over 77 routes. Look at the 13,777 projects. Look at the over 3.2 trillion that had already been captured in this report, and see some of the projects that could still be beneficial to the people of the Niger Delta region.
The federal government will, without hesitation, strategically implement all aspects of the audit exercise that will promote probity and greater prosperity for the Niger Delta region and Nigeria.
The recommendation of this report is expected to feature prominently when the President decides to inaugurate the board of the Commission.
Meanwhile, the President's hammer fell on 2 ministers as they were relieved of their duties. Ministers of Agriculture, Mohammed Sabo Nanono, and his power counterpart, Saleh Maman, were sacked in a cabinet shake-up. Special advisor to the President, Media and Publicity, Femi Adesina, announced this after a Federal Executive Council meeting on behalf of President Muhammadu Buhari. He says that the Minister of Environment, Mohammed Abubakar, has been redeployed to the ministry, while the Minister of State for Works, Abubakar Aliyu, is to take over as Minister of Power.
Nothing in the President's strides at the start of the virtual Federal Executive Council meeting gave away what was about to be a new beginning in his administration.
Senior government officials.
8 ministers, including that of Finance, Justice, Aviation, Works and Housing, Humanitarian and Disaster Management, and Sports, attended physically. During the closed-door meeting, and for the first time in 6 years, the president announced the sack of 2 ministers. From the president's speech read by the special advisor to the president, apparently weak areas have been identified.
A few changes marking the beginning of a continuous process have been approved. They are as follows. Ministers leaving the cabinet. 1. Mohammed Sabo Nanono, Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development. And 2. Engineer Salih Maman, Minister of Power. Redeployment. 1. Dr. Muhammad Mahmoud Abubakar, Minister of Environment, to assume office as the Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development. 2. Engineer Abubakar D. Aliyu, Minister of State, Works and Housing, assumes office as the Minister of Power.
It would be recalled that in September 2019, President Buhari approved a minor cabinet reshuffle with the redeployment of 2 ministers of state, the Minister of State for Niger Delta Affairs, Mr. Festus Keyamo, who was moved to Ministry of Labour and Employment as the Minister of State, and Senator Tayo Alasho Adura, moved to Ministry of Niger Delta Affairs as Minister of State. There is promise that this shake-up will not be the last.
In due course, substantive nominations will be made to fill the consequential vacancies in accordance with the requirements of the Constitution.
By the same token, the Minister of Humanitarian and Disaster Management gives account of expenditure so far on interventions to frontline states. His council approves memo for a draft national policy on internally displaced persons.
A multi-sectoral structure will fully emerge, which should ensure a coordinated, operational and strategic response to all the humanitarian challenges our great nation is facing.
With just a little over a year before the end of the current administration, the president has begun wielding the big stick. It will be recalled that there's been calls from some quarters for the president to take this sort of action, not just within the security architecture, but within his own cabinet. It appears the president is confident that this continuous process will secure better deliverables for the country. From the presidential villa, Gloria Umezuki, Channels Television News.
Over 5,000 terrorists have surrendered to the Nigerian army in the past 1 month. The army states that Nigerian troops have been able to reduce the activities of the indigenous people of Biafra and the Eastern Security Network in the southeast and economic sabotage in the southern parts of the country through Operation Hadinkai, Adarindaji Safe Haven, Wall Stroke, Delta Safe, and several non-kinetic operations.
As Nigeria battles insecurity, the Nigerian army is giving another update on its successes so far in the various theater commands across the country.
Within the last few weeks, more than 5,819 terrorists comprising of foot soldiers and their commanders have surrendered with their families to own troops in the northeast zone of the country.
It's been 12 years of conflict with Boko Haram, and over 100,000 people have been killed so far, with hundreds still in captivity and 3.2 million internally displaced persons. The impact of this 12-year war has devastated Nigeria in ways she may never heal from. Questions about what should be done with surrendered terrorists have lingered.
We've never had such large numbers of people defecting from the other side back to the Nigerian side, mainly as a result of many issues within the theater, issues of infighting among the various factions of the terrorist groups.
The governor of one of the states worst hit by Boko Haram, Borno State, is also in favor of reintegration of terrorists into the society.
Examples of countries that won't go through, that have gone through protracted internal strife, crisis, and have resolved it based on peace building, including Liberia, Sierra Leone, Mozambique, Colombia, Rwanda, among others. And therefore, yes, you are right. This is also another humanitarian crisis, but I think the state government and the federal government have the capacity to contain this situation. President is addressing the emerging humanitarian crisis as relates the ongoing surrender by the insurgents. We are on top of it.
Can a repentant terrorist successfully be reintegrated and accepted by the Nigerian people? What are the legal ramifications? Can Nigeria one day have a president who is a repentant terrorist? Reintegrating terrorists into the society is practiced all over the world, but in Nigeria, a country where its people want to see that these perpetrators of death and destruction are given the maximum penalty that there is, this might be a hard pill to swallow. Kayla Megwa, Channels Television News.
And away from security matters, the Presidential Visitation Panel to Federal Tertiary Institutions has submitted its report to the Minister of Education. The report contains infrastructure and administrative difficulties, as well as recommendations on how to address the challenges in all 88 federal tertiary institutions in Nigeria, comprising 38 universities, 25 polytechnics, and 21 colleges of education. Minister of State for Education received the report on behalf of the federal government, says the recommendations will be given accelerated implementation.
Amen. Inaugurated in April this year, the Presidential Visitation Panel to Federal Tertiary Institutions submitted their report to the federal government.
Professor James Okoro.
88 federal tertiary institutions were visited by the panel, comprising 38 universities, 25 polytechnics, and 21 colleges of education, to ascertain the state of infrastructure, finance management, and the relationship between staff, students, and management.
Abafemi Awolowo University, Ile-Ife.
One after another, chairmen of the various visitation panels submit their reports to the Minister of State for Education, who assures that the recommendations will be given accelerated implementation.
The white paper that will be drawn from the recommendations of these reports will address the challenges thus identified. It is hoped to mitigate the incessant friction between staff unions of these institutions and government and result in the much desired industrial harmony. I want to assure the nation that government will give accelerated attention to the recommendations and the white paper that will be produced from these reports.
Outside the hall, some of the chairmen of the visitation panel highlight their findings and recommendations.
What we saw is that in most of the universities, a lot has been spent, but university education is not cheap. More has to be spent. But also, we have to provide more infrastructure for our children to learn. And then the issue of disruption of the academic program, which is as a result of inability of government to meet its obligations.
Our recommendation from advocate is very clear. We think polytechnic education needs to be revamped, revisited, and assisted. They need to develop their own line of recognition. There's no reason why you cannot be a professor when you are teaching in the polytechnic.
It is hoped that the recommendations by this panel will be implemented in order to end the problems in the country's tertiary education sector, which includes the lack of infrastructure, incessant strike by lecturers, and in some cases, low quality of graduates.
The federal government will make provision for petroleum subsidy in 2022. That's according to the Group Managing Director of the NNPC, Mr. Mele Kyari. Mr. Kyari says different levels of conversations are ongoing with relevant stakeholders to exit the subsidy regime, but notes that the process may not be concluded anytime soon, hence the need to reintroduce subsidy in the 2022 budget. He was speaking during a public hearing organized by the Senate Committee on Finance on the Medium-Term Expenditure Framework and Fiscal Strategy paper.
As part of processes to prepare the 2022 budget, the Senate is holding a 3-day public hearing on the 2022 to 2024 Medium-Term Expenditure Framework (MTEF) and the Fiscal Strategy paper (FSP). The MTEF sets parameters with which the budget is prepared, including the borrowing plan of the government. The assumptions in the 2022 to 2024 MTEF puts the oil benchmark at $57 per barrel for 2022 and 2023 and $55 per barrel for 2024. The oil production is set at 1.88 million barrels per day for 2022, 2.23 million barrels per day for 2023, and 2.22 million barrels per day for 2024. While the exchange rate is kept constant at 410.15 naira, and a downward trend for inflation is anticipated.
High costs, including PMS under recovery and cost of securing oil pipelines, are however weighing down on oil revenues.
Best of the forecast that we have seen is that $7 in 2022 is very realistic, and this is the number that we can live with. Of course, bearing in mind that when you go through some of the advisory agencies, you will see numbers as high as 61, including the World Bank forecast is for $61 to the barrel, or even 62 in the year 2024.
Although no provision was made for fuel subsidy in 2021, the federal government is reintroducing it in 2022.
There's an ongoing process that is engaging organized labor, civil society organization, and very many other institutions of government that are involved in this process to arrive at a landing on how and when we can exit the subsidy regime, to be very precise. And that is why, if you see the 2022 Appropriation Act, there is a provision for subsidy in the year 2022. The reason is that we are not sure we can conclude this process before the end of this year or even early in 2022. That is why that provision is made.
The Senate Committee Chairman on Finance raises a concern about revenue generation to curb borrowing to fund the budget.
The revenue of Nigerian custom is going down. We are not meeting our targets. And we have done everything to support the Nigerian custom. We have reduced the tariff so as to discourage smuggling.
The only excise we are authorized to collect is on tobacco and alcoholic beverages. All other industries that produces in Nigeria do not pay excise. And therefore, we narrowed ourselves to that unpredictable ground.
The committee wants government agencies to focus equally on revenue generation, as they do on spending the government's money. Terry Ikumi, Channels Television News.
As part of efforts to strengthen the health system at the subnational level, commissioners of health across the country met in Abuja to discuss strategies to help Nigeria achieve universal health coverage. The Minister of State for Health, Senator Olorunbe Mamora, stated the need for collaboration between states and the federal government in this regard. On his part, Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Mr. Boss Mustafa, appealed to the commissioners to address the issues of incessant strike actions, which he says has now placed the country's health sector on autopilot.
It's a gathering of health commissioners from the 36 states of the Federation, with heads of government, ministries and parastatals to discuss how to strengthen Nigeria's health system. Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Mr. Boss Mustafa, appeals to the commissioners to help address the problem of incessant strikes by health workers, which he says has put the sector on autopilot.
The federal government also expects that you will find time as policy and decision makers to address the root causes of incessant labor crisis in the health sector. We are now in autopilot as far as crisis in the health sector is concerned.
Nigeria has poor health indices as over 900 women die out of every 100,000 live births, and 58 children out of every 1,000 live births die within their first year. The convener of this meeting underscores the importance of addressing this challenge.
The indices from Nigeria is disturbing. Burdens, maternal mortality, under-5 mortality, tuberculosis, malaria, and we need this picture to change.
The Minister of State for Health also highlights what the government is doing to increase health financing in the country.
We are currently working with the Finance Ministry to explore strategies on how to galvanize additional domestic resources for financing health through poor health taxes. There is donor fatigue. That is the truth.
Inadequate financing is a major reason for industrial unrests in Nigeria's health sector, as is the case with the ongoing strike by resident doctors, who accuse some states of owing salaries as much as 20 months.
I think it's not a lack of people wanting to compensate health workers. I think part of the problem is the constraints, the fiscal constraints that we face. There's no lack of willingness. It's a constraint of finances that is causing that.
It is hoped that at the end of the two-day meeting in Abuja, the Commissioners for Health will be able to proffer solutions to some of the problems facing the health sector.
The federal government says it's considering taking stricter measures to contain COVID-19 vaccination hesitancy once vaccines are made available to all government and corporate entities in the country. Executive Director of the National Primary Healthcare Development Agency, Dr. Faisal Shoaib, stated this at the bi-weekly news conference in Abuja to give an update on the country's COVID-19 vaccination exercise.
Thank you very much.
It's the bi-weekly briefing to give an update on the COVID-19 vaccination exercise in Nigeria. So far, only a little above 2.8 million people have received their COVID-19 vaccine in the country, out of which less than 1.5 million people have received their full vaccination. Vaccine hesitancy remains a major challenge in Nigeria, and the government says it's contemplating enforcement of a stricter measure to scale up vaccination.
Once these vaccines are made equitably available to all Nigerians, then we will have to have a frank discussion about justice, fairness, and liberty that exists around vaccine hesitancy. Your human right stops where mine begins. So you have a right to refuse vaccines, but you do not have the right to endanger the health of others.
Globally, only 5 billion doses of various COVID-19 vaccines have been administered. 2.1 million people have also received their full vaccination. These statistics is, however, low in Africa, as 52 countries administered less than 95 million doses of vaccines. Only a little over 35.1 million people have gotten full COVID-19 inoculation. Notwithstanding, the WHO says there is hope for the continent.
The good news is that increasing vaccine supplies raise hopes that the continent will meet the target of vaccinating 10% of the population by the end of September.
And as schools prepare to resume for a new session, the UNICEF country representative makes an appeal.
Teachers, you're going back to school over the next 2 months. Get vaccinated, protect yourself, and encourage others to do the same. The issue of vaccination more generally, which protects thousands of children every day, needs to be taken seriously, and you can only do that if you're protected yourself.
Nigeria is currently experiencing a third wave, and healthcare professionals say vaccination remains the only means of reducing hospitalization and deaths resulting from the virus.
We end news round in Afghanistan, where the Taliban says the country is a free and sovereign nation as it celebrates the exit of U.S. troops after 20 years of occupation, describing their departure as a historic moment. Taliban fighters have now taken charge of Kabul's airport as the last U.S. soldiers flew out of the country. Celebratory gunfire and fireworks lit up the Kabul night sky as they left.
The United States military troops have completely evacuated from Afghanistan, but leaving behind a couple hundred American civilians.
Every single U.S. service member is now out of Afghanistan. I can say that with 100% certainty. There's a lot of heartbreak associated with this departure. We did not get everybody out that we wanted to get out, But I think if we'd stayed another 10 days, Louis, we wouldn't have gotten everybody out that we wanted to get out.
The U.S. stands firm by its decision to end a 20-year war, the longest U.S. war.
The Taliban has made a commitment to prevent terrorist groups from using Afghanistan as a base for external operations that could threaten the United States or our allies, including al-Qaeda and the Taliban's sworn enemy, ISIS-K. Here, too, we will hold them accountable to that commitment.
The U.S. is less than 2 weeks away from the 20th anniversary of 9/11, a day that the U.S. vowed to eliminate terrorist threats and support democracy. The end of this U.S. mission comes with mixed emotions by some Americans. From Washington, Maria Bird, Channel Television News.
And that's Newsround this week. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Teniola Shuboale. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.